This research is based on the bibliography shown on screen.
In the official history of Jehovah's Witnesses, it's acknowledged that some Second Adventists, like George Stetson, George Storrs, and Nelson Barber, contributed to Charles Taze Russell's interpretation of the Bible. However, there's no mention of the original sources, the foundational ideas these men were drawing from. Stick around until the end, because today you'll discover who the man was and what he believed, who laid the groundwork for Jehovah's Witnesses' prophetic worldview, yet has never once been mentioned in their literature. In fact, his influence extended not only to Jehovah's Witnesses, but also to Seventh-day Adventists and even evangelical dispensationalism. Before we begin, I'm trying to reach 10,000 subscribers before the year ends, and your support would mean a lot. If you enjoy learning objectively about Jehovah's Witnesses, take a second to subscribe. We have a great time here, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And while you're at it, why not give this video a like? It helps the algorithm recommend it to more people. Thanks a ton. Manuel de Lacunza y Diaz, better known by his pseudonym Juan Josafat ben Ezra, was born in Santiago del Nuevo Extremo, now Santiago, Chile, on July 19, 1731. At the time, Chile was part of the Spanish Empire, so Lacunza was technically a Spanish subject. But in modern terms, calling him Spanish doesn't really reflect his cultural background. So, for clarity, we'll refer to him as a Chilean Catholic priest, or more specifically, a Chilean Jesuit priest. He studied philosophy and theology. In 1747, he joined the Catholic religious order known as the Society of Jesus, where he was eventually ordained. On April 2, 1767, King Charles III expelled the Jesuits from all Spanish territories. He wasn't alone. Other European monarchs made similar decisions. At a time when the line between church and state was blurred, the Jesuits, due to their intellectual influence, had accumulated religious, political, and economic power. This made them a threat to Enlightenment-era monarchs who sought greater centralized control. It was under these circumstances that Lacunza, like his fellow Jesuits, was forced into exile. He left his native Chile and settled in the Papal States within what is now Italy, arriving in the city of Imola. In 1773, under pressure from European monarchs, Pope Clement XIV dissolved the Society of Jesus. From that point on, Lacunza became a secular cleric by decree. Barred from celebrating Mass and living on limited support from his family, Lacunza secluded himself in a private home and devoted himself to theological study. It was during this time that he developed a deep interest in the doctrine of Christ's millennial reign. He first outlined his theology in a pamphlet called Anonimo Millenario, which circulated widely throughout Hispanic America, from Chile to what is now Mexico. The 22-page text triggered heated theological debates. Eventually, opponents denounced him, and the Inquisition banned the publication. But it wasn't until 1790 that Lacunza completed his major work, the 3-volume treatise, The Coming of the Messiah in Glory and Majesty. He published it under the pseudonym Juan Josafat ben Ezra, claiming to be a Jewish convert to Christianity. Until his death, Lacunza tried, unsuccessfully, to get permission from the Spanish crown to print and distribute his work. Eventually, his writings were added to the Index of Forbidden Books of the Inquisition. Let's see what it was that led to his book being banned by the Inquisition. The book taught that before the day of the Lord, several key events would occur. First, a great apostasy and persecution of faithful Christians. Then, the fall of Babylon the Great, which Lacunza identified as the papacy. He wasn't renouncing his Catholic faith. Remember, in Revelation, Babylon is described as an adulterous woman, and a woman can't be adulterous unless she's married. So Lacunza still believed the Catholic Church had legitimate authority. He simply thought it would become corrupted before Christ's return. He also believed in the future conversion of the Jewish people, that they would eventually come to accept Christ. He taught that during the second coming of Christ, the dead who had been faithful to God would be resurrected, and the faithful who were still alive would meet Jesus in the air. This would initiate a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ, during which the judgment of the living would occur first, and the judgment of the dead would occur at the end. This reign would be marked by peace, justice, and perfect order. Even the climate would change. At the end of the millennium, Christ would hand over a restored paradise earth to his Father. If you're, or have ever been, a Jehovah's Witness, a Seventh-day Adventist, or an evangelical dispensationalist, you're probably familiar with many of these ideas, maybe with some variation, but the core concepts won't be new to you. However, back then, these ideas were absolutely revolutionary. It's worth noting that as early as the 2nd century, church fathers like Irenaeus and Tertullian believed in a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ. But no one, until Lacunza, had ever described the millennial events with such detail, depth, and systematic structure. By the 5th century, thanks to Augustine, the prevailing view became that the kingdom of God had already begun with Christ's first coming, was present in the church, and would continue until Judgment Day. In this interpretation, the millennium wasn't a literal reign, but a symbolic period representing the church age. So how did the views of an exiled Jesuit priest in Italy make their way to Charles Taze Russell's Bible students, the early Adventist movement, and evangelical Protestantism? Here's the twist. General Manuel Belgrano, the Argentine independence hero and creator of its flag, was a fan of Lacunza's work. In 1815, he traveled to London as part of a diplomatic mission, along with Juan Martín de Pueyrredón and Bernardino Rivadavia. Their goal was to secure British recognition of Argentina's independence, seek political and military support, and study British institutions. While in London, Belgrano arranged for 1/500 copies of The Coming of the Messiah in Glory and Majesty to be printed. Coincidentally, this happened during a wave of apocalyptic enthusiasm in Britain, especially among high-class Anglican clergy and laity, and to a lesser extent, nonconformist pastors. One of the people who took notice was Edward Irving, a Scottish preacher, theologian, co-founder of the Catholic Apostolic Church, not to be confused with the Roman Catholic Church, and a precursor of modern Pentecostalism. After hearing about Lacunza's book, Irving spent the summer of 1826 learning Spanish so he could translate it into English. At the same time, Edward Irving and Henry Drummond, a former member of the British Parliament and a wealthy banker, organized the famous Albury Park Conferences, held from 1826 to 1830, which gave voice to millenarian interest among Britain's religious elite. Irving presented his English translation of Lacunza's work at these conferences, and it was enthusiastically received. Many of its ideas were included in the final conclusions of the Albury Park meetings. These ideas were then spread through two influential British journals: the Quarterly Journal of Prophecy and the Rainbow, which carried Lacunza's ideas across Britain, Canada, and the United States. Something important to keep in mind is that a manuscript copy of Lacunza's work, signed Juan Josaphat ben Ezra and dated 1820, is still preserved as a treasured item at the Adventist University of Chile. Even official Adventist publications, like the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists and the Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers, Volume 3, acknowledge Lacunza as a forerunner who helped create an atmosphere of eschatological expectation before the rise of William Miller. See, Jehovah's Witnesses? Other churches have the intellectual honesty to present their official history more objectively than yours. Let's bring it full circle. George Storrs, George Stetson, and Nelson Barber, all men officially recognized in Jehovah's Witness history as associates of Russell, were subscribers to the Rainbow. So was Joseph Seiss, who isn't mentioned in Watchtower literature at all. Yet in 1856 he published a book titled The Day of the Lord, which Charles Taze Russell later quoted word for word in a July 1, 1879 supplement of the Watchtower, without attribution. In fact, nearly all of Lacunza's ideas became part of the beliefs held by Charles Taze Russell and the early Bible students, with one notable exception. At the Albury Park conferences, Henry Drummond proposed that Christ's return would be invisible to the world, visible only to the faithful who would be gathered to him, a concept later adopted by Russell. Two closing thoughts. First, it's deeply ironic that Manuel Lacunza, a Catholic Jesuit priest, is such a foundational figure in Protestant eschatology. History loves its little jokes. Second, that idealized tale in Jehovah's Witnesses' official history of Charles Taze Russell meeting with Bible students in Allegheny and discovering deeper truth together is, in light of real history, entirely fabricated. Every single one of Russell's ideas was borrowed from others. So why does the governing body erase all this from their narrative? In the Watchtower's publication index from 1950 to the present, Lacunza's name doesn't appear even once, and as far as I could find, neither before 1950. Could it be because admitting the true story would undermine the idea that Russell was God's appointed channel? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And if you know someone who would find this video interesting, share it. Like, so the algorithm spreads it. Subscribe, and if you want to keep learning about Jehovah's Witnesses with facts and common sense, click on the next video. See you at the speed at which Lacunza's ideas spread.